know, when I wake up on Sunday mornings and I step into this studio, I'm always looking at where the story goes next.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We start tonight with an all-too-familiar scene in American life. This time in Winder, Georgia, about 50 miles from Atlanta, just 4 weeks into the school year there. Gunfire erupted at Appalachee High School. Here's what we know. At least 4 people are dead, 2 students and 2 teachers, and 9 injured. The suspect, a 14-year-old student who is alive and in custody and will be charged as an adult.
I don't know why it happened. I may not ever know. We may not ever know. But I ask that you and our community lift up our schools, lift up our public safety, and that, again, we do not let this hateful event prevail.
And let's bring in our Jared Eggleston, who is following the situation on the ground. Jared, it's good to see you, and I know you were there on the scene so soon after it happened. What are we learning about what unfolded at this school today?
Caitlin, good afternoon. It's been an emotional scene out here. As you saw, we just had a press conference. The sheriff here even getting teary-eyed as he talked about where the investigation stands. As you mentioned, they said that a 14-year-old student here at Appalachee High School came in with a gun this morning and began firing. At this point, they said he is in custody and is cooperating with police. They said he really surrendered just as soon as he saw those police. But back to those people who are now dealing with what they witnessed today. We've been talking to a lot of students and family members, and it's been very harrowing out here as they waited for hours to be reunited with their loved ones. And I believe we have a soundbite from a father and son who were reunited.
I started running. He started shooting like 10 times. He shot at least 10 times. And then I ran to the back of the classroom. I dived behind the desk, and my teacher had got in front of me like he was guarding. But like the gunshots were so close to me, like my ears started ringing.
My son actually called me while it was going on inside the classroom. Like I was inside the store, and I heard him hollering and screaming and crying.
And there are just so many stories just like that one, Caitlin, of parents just rushing to this school. I got here just a little bit after those reports started coming in to us. And I will say for at least a mile, about 2 miles around the school, there were just cars parked in the middle of the road, parents, loved ones running to this school to check on their children.
Oh, God, Jared, that's just so tragic to hear. And when you hear that little boy, he is a little boy, talking about what he just witnessed at just a normal day at school, or what was, at least, when he went there in the morning. Thank you for sharing that with us and for doing all those interviews. The officials that we just heard from just a little while ago mentioned that this investigation is ongoing. Details are still being figured out. But where exactly, from what you know and what you've heard, where does the investigation stand at this point?
And Caitlin, the investigation, police say that this suspect, this 14-year-old suspect, is cooperating with police. He's been interviewed by the Barrow County Sheriff's Office, it's a local agency here, and also the GBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. They are kind of leading up the investigation at this point. But I will say there are several other agencies on the ground here. The FBI, as well, is also assisting. So police say they are going through just what happened, surveillance video in the school, and they're also asking for any of these parents or families, if they think that they have something, know something about what happened here today, to please reach out to them.
And Jared, what else are we hearing from officials in the area?
So tonight we are going to have a vigil. A lot of people here are shooken up, as you might expect. So we're going to have a vigil here tonight put together by a lot of local people who are wanting to pay their respects for what happened here today. And officials tell us that school will be closed for the rest of the week here at Appalachee High School and in the entire district, just as the school tries to piece together everything and somehow figure out how to go on with the rest of the school year down the road, Caitlin.
And joining, of course, so many schools that have suffered this similar tragedy. I just can't believe just weeks into the school year. But Jared, thank you so much for your reporting. This is a very difficult assignment, and thank you very much for bringing it to us. Stay safe. And Vice President Kamala Harris called the high school shooting in Georgia a, quote, senseless tragedy. And she made these comments during a speech in New Hampshire, where she unveiled a new proposals to help small businesses. Former President Donald Trump called the shooter a, quote, deranged monster on social media. Ed O'Keefe is with us now from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, following the campaign. Ed, good to see you. As I mentioned, an all too familiar scene here in American life, but also in American politics, politicians having to respond to yet another school shooting. Tell us a little bit more about what Kamala Harris had to say, because she was on the campaign trail when this happened.
Yeah, Caitlin, this was the first time since she became the presumptive and then official Democratic Party nominee that this kind of an event had happened and, in essence, interrupted or overshadowed what was an otherwise completely unrelated stop here in New Hampshire. So she brought it up at the beginning of her appearance at a nearby brewery and said this.
It's just outrageous that every day in our country, in the United States of America, that parents have to send their children to school worried about whether or not their child will come home alive. It's senseless. It is. We've got to stop it. And we have to end this epidemic of gun violence in our country once and for all. You know, it doesn't have to be this way.
The other point that the vice president made, Caitlin, is that in her tour of college campuses over the past year, she often would ask the students whether they'd ever participated in a active shooter drill, as opposed to an earthquake drill for kids out in California like her back in the day, or a fire drill. And she said most hands would go up in any auditorium or arena she was in when she asked that question, a sign of the times, and something that older Americans certainly may not be able to relate to.
Yeah, but that's something that you and I most certainly can, having just both dropped our kids off at school for the start of the school year recently here in Washington. Ed, shifting gears a little bit here, you know, Kamala Harris was, as you mentioned, supposed to be talking about these new proposals for small businesses. What did she outline today? What is she proposing?
Yeah, a few different things, and notable that she's doing it in a state that has little or no taxes, has no tolerance for them, to come to what is in essence a maybe not deeply blue state, lightly shaded at this point, likely to go Democratic, but wanted to shore it up here at the start of the final stretch. And she proposed today a series of things designed to benefit small businesses, like the dozens that line the streets of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where we are this afternoon. Among other things, there would be a new tax deduction available to new small business startups. Right now, you can take about $5,000 in deductions for startup costs. She's proposing up to $50,000 in deductions, which is in essence is a huge tax break for somebody starting a business. The average cost, her campaign say, for a startup is about $40,000 in that first year. There are other things like new loans that would be interest-free loans that would be offered from community banks to small businesses, plans that would make a standard deduction for small businesses available, just as there is a standard deduction for people who might want to take one if they meet certain income levels. All of it designed, in essence, to reduce the paperwork and the time necessary to do your bookkeeping when small business owners who don't necessarily have an accounting department or an outside accountant don't have the time to do that and need to be able to focus on the big job. No surprise in talking to some people around here today, there is interest in this, support for it generally. She hinted, though didn't specify, that at least some of this would be paid for with higher taxes on wealthy Americans and on big corporations, and on ensuring that, you know, especially those corporations certainly would pay more. And we also got to point out, this is just a pie-in-the-sky idea for now. It would require congressional action. Congress already, however it's divided next year, has a series of tax-related issues it's going to have to address, including whether to extend the Trump-era tax cuts for wealthier earners.
All right, so Ed, she's introducing some policy proposals. She's also preparing for that big debate next week. We just have about a minute left, but tell us what you know so far about how she's planning to prepare.
She's going to Pittsburgh, Caitlin. Tomorrow she heads out to Western Pennsylvania and is essentially camping out there until next Tuesday, when she'll head across the state to Philadelphia to face off with the former president, who continues to say there's no need to hold formal debate sessions because he's been, quote, preparing my entire life. We'll see how that goes this weekend and whether the formal preparation or the lack thereof make any difference on Tuesday.
And we know debates have made all the difference so far in this campaign, so we'll see if next week is any different. Ed O'Keefe with a beautiful Portsmouth backdrop in this shot. We appreciate your time and your reporting. Good to see you.
Take care.
And we'll have full coverage of that first debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump on Tuesday. America Decides will be live from the Spin Room in Philadelphia at 5 p.m. Eastern. And the debate itself, hosted by ABC News, can also be watched right here, starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. Well, the Biden administration hits Russia with sanctions over its efforts to manipulate Americans' opinions ahead of the presidential election. Our Scott McFarlane is at the Justice Department with what Attorney General Merrick Garland announced today. You're streaming America Decides.
These are the stories
1, 2, 3, go!
of We the People.
We're trying to generate our own hope.
It's a huge deal.
I'm enabling them to feel valued.
Eye on America, weeknights on the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
That's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party? Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides. Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Exclusively on CBS News 24/7, the streaming home of CBS News.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Welcome back to America Decides. The Biden administration is accusing Russia of attempting to interfere in the 2024 presidential election. Attorney General Merrick Garland says the Kremlin led an influence campaign designed to covertly spread Russian propaganda.
An internal planning document created by the Kremlin states that as a goal of the campaign is securing Russia's preferred outcome in the election.
And Scott McFarlane joins us now from the Justice Department. Scott, good to see you. Let's talk about these actions that the DOJ is talking about. What did they say has been disrupting this operation?
a variety of different tools, according to the Department of Justice, more sophisticated, more elaborate than previous attempts by Russia to interfere with U.S. elections. Let's start with RT, which is a state-owned Russian media company that, according to the Department of Justice, was trying to spread far and wide Russian disinformation, information that flatters Russia, criticizes Ukraine, and stirs up all kinds of wedge issues among Americans. They're also alleging here that, unlike past times, they were utilizing social media influencers in the United States to perpetrate some of this propaganda, deceiving the social media influencers to push this information out to millions of followers. They're also alleging that these Russian officials used false information, misinformation, but tried to falsely label it as coming from the Washington Post or Fox News to give it some brand credibility to help it resonate further and wider with would-be voters. But they're also seizing 32 internet domains. In fact, they did so this afternoon. The Department of Justice says were used also to further fire hose out misinformation. What's particularly noteworthy in the 270-page affidavit released today by federal prosecutors is the playbook the Russians used to get into the heads and potentially into the voting booths for Americans, targeting wedge issues like crimes by immigrants, like white people losing jobs, like the issue of inflation. All the things we've been hearing about in this election, the Russians have been trying to amplify to sow discord and sow some form of cynicism into the voters' minds.
Hear kind of the details there. I know Garland also spoke about the spike in threats to election workers. What more are we learning about that?
Yeah, there's an election security task force the Department of Justice operates. It has the Attorney General, it has the FBI Director, it has other high-ranking officials. What they've said is that they are seeing a spike since 2020 in the amount of threats targeting election workers and election officials. Just a terrible dynamic to ensure the integrity of our elections and that people still want to volunteer and serve the public. They have charged some of these cases recently. Some of them have been relatively high profile, but they're anticipating more as we get closer and closer to November 5th. The Department of Justice is trying to articulate this as a priority, potentially as a deterrent to stop this type of targeting, but also to make clear that there will be prosecutions for those responsible.
And election workers, just most of them volunteers and wanting to make elections run smoothly. I want to switch gears a little bit because tomorrow there's going to be a key hearing in that 2020 election interference case against former President Trump. I know you'll be covering it. What should we expect?
10 a.m. on the East Coast, Judge Tanya Chutkin reopens her courtroom to this USA versus Donald Trump election conspiracy case. The case was frozen, you'll recall, more than half a year ago as all those appeals went through the federal court system and ultimately to the Supreme Court over the issue of presidential immunity. The Supreme Court ruled on July 1st, giving Trump some version of immunity. Tomorrow, the special counsel, Caitlin, will articulate to the judge how they plan to move forward. Still 4 federal charges against Donald Trump, still on a trajectory towards trial. Maybe tomorrow we get a sense of the timeline and how the defense for Donald Trump will try to knock this case out.
Something we will all be following. Scott McFarland, as always, thank you, covering Congress, Capitol Hill, the campaign trail, and now the Justice Department. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is suing the county that includes San Antonio over a voter registration plan. Bexar County officials were moving ahead with a plan to mail registration forms to eligible residents. Paxton claims in the lawsuit that the county does not have the authority to mail these out, and he's seeking an emergency order to block that program. Israelis grow impatient over efforts to free the October 7th hostages as thousands take to the streets. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby will join us next with the latest on the ceasefire talks. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places. right, shiny faces?
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate. Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform. You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
And welcome back to America Decides. The Biden administration is working to secure a ceasefire deal and a hostage deal in the Middle East. Israelis protested in the streets for the 3rd day in a row to put pressure on their government to do the same. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby joins us now. It's great to see you. Thanks for being here. I want to get to the Middle East in just a moment. But first, I do want to ask you about this school shooting in Georgia, this tragic event today. What is the president doing to address this?
Well, as you know, the president's been monitoring this very much all day. His team has kept him completely apprised and informed. I think you also heard the Attorney General make clear today that FBI and other federal law enforcement authorities, as appropriate, are on the ground and providing whatever assistance they can to the ongoing investigation. We, of course, all of us here at the White House are just devastated by this terrible, terrible news. And the idea that these high school kids just going to school, just starting up after summer, could have this kind of violence visited on them by apparently one of their students is just so shocking and so terrible, so sad. And our hearts and prayers go out to all the families affected by this, as well as the students who, even if they may not have been hurt, but believe me, they're hurting and they're feeling it. And we want them to know that we're feeling with them, and we're going to continue to do what we can to support.
Yeah, our hearts go out to them, too. Thank you for that. I do want to turn now to the war in Gaza. And I mentioned those protests that have been happening against the Israeli government. How do you see this? I mean, is this putting any sort of pressure on Israel to make a deal more likely?
I think I would refer to Prime Minister Netanyahu to speak to his intentions in terms of trying to move forward. I will say, however, that Israel was a full participant in the discussions last week in Doha and in Cairo. This was an Israeli proposal that originally started this whole round of negotiations back in May. It was an Israeli proposal. So we're acting in complete concert with our Israeli counterparts and our other counterparts in the region to try to get this over the finish line. What it requires in the end, when you get to the end like this, and you're really negotiating over implementing details, that's when it gets hard. That's when the horse trading really has to start in earnest. That's when the details are being fleshed out. And that's where we are right now. So, as the president has said, in order to get this over the finish line, we need leadership. We need leadership in the region. Certainly, we, the United States, are going to continue to be an active mediator here. But we also need leaders to be able to compromise, to come down to the final details here and ink the final agreements. That's where we are, and obviously we're not giving up on the effort.
Yeah, and you said this is where you are at the end. I mean, how close is the end?
We believe we're very close. We believe that the gaps that are remaining are really all about how the deal gets implemented, not the deal itself. The essential framework of the proposal has been agreed to. What we're negotiating over or how those basic details are going to actually get implemented and organized and carried through. So we're very, very close. And we do believe that a positive outcome here can be achieved, that we can get this deal. But we've been here before, too. We felt we were really close in the past few months and weren't able to close it. So we're also pragmatic about this. And all I can tell you is that we're going to keep at the work, that nobody's going to be able to say that the United States, President Biden in particular, hasn't put an awful lot of energy, every ounce of it that we can, and leadership to get this done.
And you mentioned partners in the Middle East. President Biden said recently that he believes that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should be doing more. Does the administration believe that he is an obstacle to peace?
The Prime Minister can speak to his own prerogatives here, as I said earlier. The main obstacle to peace here, let there be no mistake, is Hamas. I mean, just over the weekend, slaughtering, a half a dozen of their hostages as the IDF approached that location. That tells you the evil that we're all up against. So the main obstacle is Mr. Sinwar and Hamas. There was a ceasefire in place on the 6th of October. On the 7th of October, he decided to declare war on Israel. But as I said earlier, we want all sides to come together in earnest to get this over the finish line. That requires leadership. That requires some compromise.
Yeah, and I'm curious, too, what you think of the Department of Justice charging Hamas leaders in connection with the October 7th attacks. Does this at all have any impact on the White House's attempt to get a deal done here?
I don't think that's going to have any impact on the actual deal negotiating itself. I mean, these were charges that actually date back to the 7th of October attack. As you said, they were just recently unsealed. It does show how seriously we take what Hamas did and our obligations to hold terrorists accountable for what they've done. But the mediators of Qatar and Egypt that are dealing with Hamas, they assure us that they can continue to have those conversations. And so that's where we are.
And I want to quickly move over to another regional conflict, as it's been called. The administration is accusing Russia of engaging in interference, campaign interference leading up to the 2024 presidential election. What exactly does this interference look like from what you can tell? And how does it compare to previous election years? And is there a specific campaign that has been the target?
It's much more sophisticated than what we've seen out of the Russians in the recent past, certainly than what we saw in 2016. Yes, they're using social media, but they're much more pervasive at it. They're creating false persona, using artificial intelligence to help drive content and distribute content. And they're much more resourced and organized, using RT, what was formerly just a propaganda organ for the Kremlin, now has turned into a full covert influence activity with full funding to do this kind of work by funneling resources and organizing editorial content in actual media outlets. In one case, a media company here in the United States. So it's a bigger effort. It's certainly more sophisticated and better resourced. Look, on what their preferred candidate is, I'm just going to go so far as to say what the Attorney General said today. We know they're taking these activities to promulgate Russian propaganda, to try to push their policies and items that are of interest to them, to undermine confidence in Ukraine and what Ukraine's trying to do to defend itself, and to undermine our own democracy. That's what we're seeing, and that's what we spoke to today.
Yeah, the details in that report were very startling, to say the least. John Kirby, thank you very much for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
And Pennsylvania is one of, if not the most watched battleground state this November. So why is a former Republican senator from that state taking a pass on Election Day? That's next on America Decides.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
It can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Brand new polling has the presidential race in a dead heat. The CNN poll found several states within the margin of error. That includes Pennsylvania, where the candidates are in a virtual tie. For more on this, let's bring in our esteemed political panel, Haima Moore and Lance Trover. Haima served as director of the office of the DNC chair, and Lance served as the campaign spokesman for Doug Burgum's presidential campaign. Gentlemen, great to see you here. So I just keep thinking about all of the conventions, all of the money that's being poured into these races, and it is essentially a virtual tie. I want to start with you, Haima, just coming off of the Democratic National Convention. what do you make of that? I mean, I know Kamala Harris has described herself as an underdog, but kind of all the momentum that she was getting during the convention, are we seeing any kind of dissipation of that?
No, I don't think we are seeing dissipation of that. But here's the reality. So we knew that this race was going to be a dead heat from the beginning. Even when Joe Biden was the candidate for the Democrats, it was always a dead heat. The country is divided in a way that is apparent in these polling. So you're going to go state by state, and it's very difficult to say one state's red, one state is blue. This is going to be the case for the next few weeks. It may be the case up until Election Day. But I do think that Kamala Harris still has a lot of momentum. She's running a really sound campaign. She and Tim Walz understand that the only thing that counts right now is getting the voters to vote.
And Lance, I want to put on your NRSC hat for a little bit, because what's also interesting in these polls, and we've seen that kind of throughout the campaign, is that while the race is really tight, in these Senate races, the Democrats are running pretty far ahead of the Republicans, except in Pennsylvania, actually. That was a dead heat. But I'm wondering kind of what you make of that dynamic and why.
I think that I think the Senate is probably still going to go Republican. There's a pickup opportunities, West Virginia, Ohio. There's definitely some states that lean red that I think are going to happen. There's a long way to go in this campaign. I mean, we're talking 60 days out. That's an eon in politics. And so there are
Especially
a lot of...
this year.
Yeah, I mean, we had a different presidential candidate not too terribly long ago.
Exactly.
But I do think it is all coming down to Pennsylvania. If you look at these polls, that is really quite telling that both campaigns are going to be completely focused on that state. It's kind of the new Florida of back in the day, right? And I think that's where everything's going to be poured into that state.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that state, Pat Toomey, the former Republican senator from Pennsylvania, had this to say about the election. I want to play a little bit of that.
When you lose an election and you try to overturn the results so that you can stay in power,
we all are familiar
you lose
with
me.
What if it came down to one vote? And it was yours that put Kamala Harris, then it is yours.
It is an acceptable position for me to say that neither of these candidates can be my choice for president.
So I know he's a former senator, and we saw during the RNC Republicans united around the former president. But I'm wondering what you make of those comments. Do they matter in a state like Pennsylvania?
Pat Toomey, Adam Kinzinger, you name these guys who don't want to vote for President Trump. They've been very vocal about it. I just say, look at the poll that just came out. It's 47-47. Donald Trump's locked up the Republican vote. I'm not sure any Republican out there, even in Pennsylvania, really cares what he says about that. Sorry, Senator.
But I do think it matters to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. It validates that they are trying to reach out to Republicans, to conservatives, to independents. And so I think it gives them some room for, addition, I believe.
You know, what's so striking to me is that next week, Kamala Harris and Trump will meet for the first time. I mean, it's wild to me that they haven't actually met. Let's talk a little bit about that debate, because that will be the first time they see each other. Kamala Harris is going to be in Pennsylvania until the debate, preparing, but also campaigning a little bit as well. What do you want her to do? What do you want her to get out of this?
Yeah, I think, look, Kamala Harris enjoys this. She enjoys this political sport in particular. And so I think a couple of things that she's got to do. She's got to show Americans who she is. I think people still have a question mark about where she stands on certain issues. So she's got to remind people where she stands on certain issues. Secondly, she's got to be strong against the former president. We saw Donald Trump in the debate with Hillary Clinton. We saw Donald Trump debate with Joe Biden. He's a very great debater. And so I think Kamala Harris has to show that she can match that energy. And I think lastly, she's got to be clear about her vision for the future. She's talking about not going back. What does that mean? And so she's got to be very clear about what she and Tim Walz would like to do for the next 4 years.
And what about Donald Trump? I mean, we have this argument over the past several years about whether debates matter. Well, it turns out that they really do. It knocked a candidate out of the race, essentially. Donald Trump is, known for saying he doesn't need to prepare for these, and he has shown a deftness of being, able to talk off the cuff in some of these debates. But what does he need to do, or can he just go in there unprepared?
Well, I think you should always prepare for debates, but I'm far be it for me to tell the former president what to do. I think there's one thing we can all agree on here at this table. The voting public is pretty well in tune with Donald Trump and who he is and all of the good and bad things that come with that. I think if you're Donald Trump, the one thing you cannot let Kamala Harris do is try to continue kind of what I would say is rewriting history. In her campaign, it's, I was a prosecutor and, oh, by the way, I'm a moderate running for president. I think he has to be really strong in calling out a lot of her far left voting record in the Senate and her time as vice president when inflation has soared 20%, when the border has been out of control. So I think she's going to try to gloss over many of these last 7 or 8 years. I think for him, he can't let her do that.
And it's interesting, too, because Harris and Biden were together on Labor Day. Do you think that she needs to create distance from him? Is that possible to do, especially as, you know, the Trump campaign strategy is to say that she inherits all of the baggage?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Joe Biden has been a phenomenal president. I think Kamala Harris has said that, and she says it every day. But here's the thing. She's got to create some space just to show voters that she's will be a different president than Joe Biden. I don't think that she needs to disavow Joe Biden. Joe Biden's been a fantastic president. He did a lot for this country. She would not be the nominee had he not stepped aside, and she recognizes that. But they're two different people. You know, she was the vice president, so she didn't make these decisions. Joe Biden did. And so now she wants to be the person to make the decision, and she's got to prove that she can do that without throwing Joe Biden under the bus. Yeah,
and this idea, too, of you know, in polling, we see the race has tightened. From a Republican's perspective, are the attacks on her working as you've seen them?
I think you see it in the polling. I mean, this is going to be a very tight race all the way through. I think the key, obviously, are going to be the 15% of undecided voters that were in those polls. That's where it all lies, and that's why this debate next week, I think, is going to be absolutely huge, to quote the former president.
I agree. All right. Well, you can tune in. It's carried by ABC News, but it will also be carried right here on CBS. So another plug for that. Haima and Lance, thank you very much for your time. We'll talk to you soon over these next 60 or so days. And speaking of the election, the first mail ballots will be sent to voters this Friday as some Americans get set to cast their ballot. Where does the race for the White House actually stand? We'll break down the latest numbers next on America Decides.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. We are less than 9 weeks out from Election Day, and it is a very tight race. Our polling finds Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are neck and neck in the battleground states. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now. So, Anthony, you know, we were just talking with the panel about how we're coming off these two conventions. We have so much money pouring into this race, and yet it is a neck-and-neck race. Tell us where this race stands now in these battlegrounds.
Hey, in a word, Caitlin, it's close. In 2 words, it's close and tight. This is a map that illustrates it, and get used to this. We're going to watch this a lot. The states in white are those battleground states that we keep talking about, and they are so determinative, not only because they are close, but you can start to see the paths that each of these candidates might have through the electoral map to winning, right? So just hypothetical, Kamala Harris might try to win what's called the blue wall, the upper Midwest states. Most times they go Democratic in recent history, but not always, okay? She also might have a different kind of route through the Sun Belt, through North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. That'd get her over 270. The story there, fast-growing, diversifying states, maybe that's a possibility. But for Donald Trump, you know, he's got lots of paths, too. One I'd illustrate here is he could win Georgia, which he didn't in 2020, win North Carolina, which he did in 2020, and then Pennsylvania, y'all. We're talking about how critical that is. If he flips Pennsylvania back, then he gets to 270. Lots of different combinations, though I will say this. A, remember, not national polls, it's states that matter. And 2, that even when you're looking at all this, little shifts in the polling in these states, 1 point, 2 points, that all is going to come down to turnout. That is not a big deal, 1 or 2 point moves. These states are all close, Kayla.
Anthony, I'm so jealous that you get to play around with this map and all of these scenarios. It's what I like to do in my free time as well. But watching these polls in these battleground states that you are doing, what is standing out to you in these states?
Well,
what should we watch for?
Yeah, and by the way, I share that hobby. In December, well, I'll turn to other hobbies, but it is the map at this point. Look, here are our latest CBS estimates, and the point here is 1 point difference, even 2 points. This illustrates what I was saying, which is besides margin of error, which is always important, you realize there are other uncertainties here. All that money you talked about at the top of this, that's going to go voter by voter, people walking precincts, people targeting them online with advertising, because that's where somebody votes, somebody doesn't vote, somebody shows up, somebody doesn't cast that absentee ballot. All of that is going to matter in all of these polls. You're not necessarily going to see that. You're going to see it on the ground in terms of turnout, Kayla.
Yeah, you really feel for all those voters in those battlegrounds just getting pummeled with advertising, text messages, and everything else. So they'll get some relief in 60 or so days. Anthony Salvanto, thank you as always. We'll keep our eye on that map. And now to Omaha, Nebraska, where mysterious signs are popping up on lawns, and they feature no words, just a simple blue dot on a white background. A local couple began making and distributing those signs to symbolize how Democrats can win a key electoral vote in a state that went for Trump in 2016 and in 2020. It highlights this unique way that Nebraska awards electoral votes. So bear with me. Here's how it works. Of Nebraska's 5 electoral votes, only 2 go to the state's overall popular vote winner. And the remaining 3 votes represent Nebraska's 3 congressional districts. And those are individually allocated to the candidate who wins it. And that makes neighborhoods around the more left-leaning Omaha all the more important in terms of Harris's path to the White House. And so far, the grassroots effort, those blue dots, they've distributed over 2,000 signs. And one of Donald Trump's strongest bases of support is evangelical Christians. Our Major Garrett traveled to Wisconsin to look at how a group of them are working to help the former president win another term in the White House.
In Eau Claire, Wisconsin, this summer, a tent revival attracted hundreds of charismatic Christians to receive revelation and wade into the gospel of Trumpism.
The Holy Spirit lives inside of you.
Tens of thousands joined online, all part of the so-called Courage Tour, a religious roadshow that is unapologetically political.
You can't make America great again until you restore an awakening with God again.
The goal? Motivate fellow charismatic Christians, many of whom don't belong to a formal church structure but find God in wonders and miracles, to evangelize for Donald Trump all the way to November.
We believe it's time to release the roar of Christian voters across America.
Joshua Standifer is part of the Courage Tour.
Do you mean Christian voters or do you mean pro-Trump Christian voters?
It's all the above.
It sounds to me like most of this messaging is pro-Trump.
You are literally seeing two sets of values and worldviews on display. And it just so happens one naturally aligns more to what we believe.
In Trump, evangelicals don't see an abrasive, thrice-married billionaire. They do see an anti-establishment leader strong on abortion, gender issues, and Israel.
I want people to vote because he stands for something.
Brother and sister attendees Jackie Brokaw and David Jansen.
2020 is a fraud, and everybody knows it. The number of Christians that are in this area, if they would vote, they could swing this county, which would probably swing the rest of the state.
The Courage Tour targets key counties in battleground states, including places where Trump lost narrowly in 2020. In addition to voter mobilization, organizers want charismatic Christians as poll watchers and workers.
What we are seeing here today is the most targeted and tactical voter mobilization effort done by Christian nationalists ever.
Matthew Taylor has written extensively about this new form of religious activism that fuses political outcomes with divine intervention.
What is the political import, possibly, in the 2024 election of events like this?
Well, if Trump wins, then that becomes a part of the impetus that Donald Trump can say, I don't just have a democratic mandate, I have a divine mandate to change the country in accordance with the biblical values that these folks claim to have.
You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians.
Trump's election denialism electrified and galvanized charismatics online for weeks leading up to the January 6th Capitol riot.
January 6th was not an insurrection. It was an election fraud intervention.
Many of the people who were leaders in this movement also showed up on January 6th because they really believed that the election was being stolen.
That was our Major Garrett reporting. So why are these, quote, charismatic Christians backing a second Trump presidency? Well, we'll speak with a religion scholar, Matthew Taylor, right here from that piece about that next. You're streaming America Decides.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean? What does that mean in
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened? Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, at the Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party?
Any cracks in the Republican Party? Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here. We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way. We take you places. We teach you new things. And we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
Welcome back to America Decides. Evangelicals across the United States are working to bolster their support for former President Donald Trump through Election Day. And this includes the fastest growing group of them, and they're called Charismatic Christians. For more on this, let's bring in Matthew D. Taylor to discuss. He is a senior scholar and the Protestant scholar for the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies. He's also the author of a soon-to-be-published book, The Violent Take It by Force, the Christian movement that is threatening our democracy. Matthew, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. So we watched Major's piece, which featured you in it, and this group called Charismatic Christians. What exactly does that mean? Where do they get their name? Who are they?
So the term charismatic actually comes from the Bible. It's rooted in a Greek term, charismata, which refers to the gifts or the graces of God. So the Pentecostal movement is one of the first of the charismatic movements in the modern era. So charismatic Christians are Christians who are focused on recapturing what they think is the supernatural or miraculous ethos of early Christianity. These are Christians who want to experience Christianity, who want to experience miracles. So they're marked by things like speaking in tongues, prophecy. They're interested in healing and faith healing. So these are Christians who have a much more visceral connection to Christianity. And in modernity, they're trying to get back to what they think was the vision of the early church.
And, you know, it's interesting covering Trump and talking to a lot of his supporters. A lot of them have mentioned to us as we're reporting that they believe after the assassination attempt that he was saved by God. I actually asked the former president about that a couple weeks ago in our interview. Here's what he had to say.
There has to be a reason, and I do believe in God. I also believe perhaps God had a purpose that he wants to save this country. And I think that may have really been a reason.
And I'm curious from your perspective, how is that dynamic mobilizing voters in this more organized way?
Almost as soon as Donald Trump entered the race in 2015, you started having these charismatic Christians, especially leaders and celebrities in that world, megachurch pastors, televangelists, prophets, gather around Trump and imbue him with a certain spiritual ethos. They saw him as a divinely anointed figure. And there were many prophecies coming from these prophets, these modern day prophets, talking about Trump, talking about God's hand in his life, his destiny. And so in a way that I don't think we've ever seen in American history, there's this religious attachment to a political figure that they actually believe that Donald Trump is anointed by God. And the assassination attempt, for many of them, confirmed that. They see it as a miraculous deliverance, that God was the one who turned Trump's head at the last moment and saved him and spared his life that day. And so for them, it fulfills, in many ways, the prophecies that they believe are already there.
In your book, you talk about the threat that this group could pose to democracy. What do you mean by that?
So let me be clear. I don't think that charismatic Christians as a whole are a threat to American democracy. I grew up evangelical. I grew up even charismatic in many ways. But there are particular sets of leaders and networks of leaders who've embraced very extreme theologies in this world. They believe that God is mandating for them to take over all the different segments of society, to Christianize society according to their vision of Christianity and their interpretation of the Bible. They use phrases like taking dominion, believing that it is their responsibility as Christians to take over. These are some of the same leaders who have gathered around Trump, been many of his evangelical advisors, been many of his chief Christian propagandists. And my worry is that for many of them, their attachment to Trump, it has very little to do with Christianity, with American democracy, and much more to do with fulfilling what they think is God's will.
All right, well, we will look forward to that book. It's very timely. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. And that does it for us today, but we'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for September 4th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. The return to school has brought with it the return of school shootings, a uniquely American ritual. We will have the latest reporting from Appalachee High School in Winder, Georgia. Kamala Harris